Monday, June 17th, 2019. This is the Pro and the Con Show. I am your host, Michael James Ott. Welcome to the show. So looking through the 5 different websites from left to right. Well, let's go from right to left this time. So Breitbart on the right, Fox News, National Public Radio in the center, CNN, left of center, and Huffington Post all the way on the left there. And looking through today's news, it feels like a fairly slow news day, to be honest. There's not a lot major things going on. So I just wanted to let's hit the Supreme Court, because it looks like one of their terms is winding down here, and they're getting ready to do it looks like a whole series of of decisions. And so NPR has an article headlined "Supreme Court Justices Split Along Unexpected Lines in 3 Cases." So they announced 4 decisions today, and 3 of them have an odd mix. A lot of times the justices split, kind of by these guys are more conservative, these are more liberal, and it's almost predictable. But not so not so this week. And I honestly, okay, I'm going to inject opinion here before I get back to the facts. I personally think that the Supreme Court justices should be not predictable per se in the like conservative versus liberal, and that it would be a mistake to burden the court with too much same leaning thinking, because these laws that come to the court, I think it's absolutely appropriate that they actually get debated at a pretty significant level from the different viewpoints. And of course, I'm Mr. Pro and Con, right? So pro and con, good and bad, for and against. And on the Supreme Court, they need to have that same thing going on. They need to be looking at these issues, these laws, from multiple aspects. And if we get the court too lopsided, then they won't be doing that, and it'll be a failure for all of us. Okay, so that's opinion. Now back to the facts. Okay, so there's just some short summaries here that's provided by NPR. There's not a lot of rhetoric or anything in these. Dual sovereignty upheld, with which is interesting. So in a 7-2 vote, the court affirmed a 100-year-old rule that the court has had for obviously 100 years now, declaring that state governments and the federal government may each prosecute a person separately for the same crime, without violating the Constitution's double jeopardy clause. Now, I wouldn't have known that. Dissenting were the court's leading liberal justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and one of its most conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch. It's very interesting. So in a 7-2 vote, so you can be prosecuted twice for the same crime, one on a federal level and one on a state level, if there's statutes at both levels. That's an interesting thing. So the gerrymandering, there's this redistricting of voting, and there's a lot of claims that the Republican Party has been aggressively doing this over the last decade or so, to try to influence how elections come out, by carefully selecting the lines where voters are to redistrict them so that to their benefit. So, spurning pleas from Virginia Republicans, the court let stand decisions by lower courts that had found that 11 state districts were racially gerrymandered, and this was in violation of the Constitution. So the Supreme Court said that the Republican-dominated Virginia House of Delegates had no legal standing to appeal to the Supreme Court on its own when the state and the state's Attorney General had decided against appealing. So, so what happened is the state Senate and the Attorney General, they were okay with the lower courts, basically saying that these gerrymandering things could not be appealed or could not be instituted. And then the House of Delegates, so the Virginia House of Representatives, basically the state representatives, had tried to appeal this all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the court said no. So that's interesting. So this was a 5-4 vote, and so Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the opinion, and she was joined by conservative Justices Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas and liberal Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. And dissenting were conservative Justice Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, and Chief Justice John Roberts, as well as liberal Justice Stephen Breyer. So there you go. But again, I personally think it seems reasoned and reasonable to me that a bunch of 9-0 decisions on the Supreme Court just means that we don't have the right mix of people on the Supreme Court. It just would seem correct to me that the decisions would always be 5-4, 6-3, maybe sometimes 7-2. There's another one. The court upheld Virginia's ban on uranium mining. So Virginia has a ban on uranium mining apparently in the state. And in a 6-3 vote, the justices said that the state law was not superseded by the Federal Atomic Energy Act. So writing for the majority, Gorsuch said the Atomic Energy Act gives the federal government the authority to regulate nuclear safety, but not the authority to regulate mining itself. And so fellow conservatives Thomas and Kavanaugh joined Gorsuch, but liberal justices, and they're also joined by liberal justices Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan, but only partially. Apparently, the upholding the ban on the mining was fine, but apparently Gorsuch, when he wrote his opinion, the liberal justices had an issue with some of the language in it that was too broad. So they specifically said that they agreed with the bottom line in this particular case that Virginia can ban uranium mining in its state, but then not to read into it apparently what Gorsuch was saying, which was there was a broader implication of their decision. And then there was one final, so the fourth one was the so-called traditional 5-4 split, because there's 5 justices that are generally considered to be more conservative leaning and 4 that are generally considered to be more liberal. So the only split on Monday came in a case testing whether a private corporation that runs a public access TV channel is a public forum, and so like a public park, cannot discriminate against various speakers. So it's the First Amendment freedom of speech thing. Yeah, so the court, in a 5-4 vote, concluded that the public access channel was actually owned by Time Warner, which is a corporation, and not by the city. And because it is privately owned, the channel could not be sued or forced into providing alternate information. In this case, they refused to air a movie that someone said was their responsibility to do so in kind of an equal access to the airwaves. I suppose rebuttal or something to something else that they were showing. Kavanaugh wrote the decision for the 5 conservative justices, saying merely hosting speech by others is not a traditional exclusive public function. So here's the reason why I bring this up. So therefore, channel operators cannot be sued for violating the First Amendment guarantee to free speech. So this seems to infer that lawsuits against other private platform operators like Twitter and Facebook, so I'm on Facebook Live right here. Also, these videos appear on YouTube. Well, in theory, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they're all screening some amount of the information because they think it's inappropriate, and I think a bunch of us agree. But they in theory might have been sued over it because of this First Amendment kind of thing. So equal time, equal availability of speech, and so it infers that the Twitter and Facebook would be able to do that, and YouTube and other privately owned information channels, if you will. But Kavanaugh, when he wrote his comments on his decision, he warned that the decision should not be read too broadly. So what that basically means is that if there was a future time where someone was believing that Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or some other information channel, even though it was privately owned, was egregiously presenting certain information and failing to present kind of the opposing view kind of thing, that it could bubble up to the Supreme Court again, and they might consider it. At least Justice Kavanaugh thinks that would be the case. So that's basically the news for today. Really, it's like I say, a pretty quiet day. Just some other comments. It looks like the initial lead that Joe Biden had, he announced his candidacy kind of late relative to the other 20-something Democratic candidates that they're vying for the nomination of the Democratic Party. Anyway, so as some people speculated when he initially had a big lead, that lead is apparently eroding in several states that are being polled, and so it looks like at the moment you've got Mr. Biden, Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, and Senator Elizabeth Warren. So it looks like there's roughly 5 Democrats. So the lead that Mr. Biden had is eroding. Mr. Sanders is kind of mostly staying where he was. And these other 3, Klobuchar, Warren's, and Buttigieg, are coming up. So we'll see where that goes. Only time will tell. But yeah, that was yeah. So, and we don't deal in speculation. So that's, the who, the what, the where, and the when. So the current polls, for as they are, the polling is changing, and it looks like I say, Mr. Biden is losing some of his early lead, and these other three are kind of taking up his lost support and kind of rising up. So it's interesting. So it looks like we have roughly 5 major popular candidates in the Democratic Party out of the 23 or 24 or whatever it is that are out there vying for the nomination at this point. And I think Wednesday and Thursday of this week are some debates amongst those candidates. So we'll see what happens during those debates. All right, so probably running out of time. Pro and Con Show. I'm your host, Michael James Ott. Thanks for watching. Again, hoping that this has stimulated a little bit of thought and openness, and some conversation amongst you and your family and your friends. Let's come together. Let's talk about these issues: the pro and the con, the good and the bad, the for and against. And I think we're actually a lot closer together than we sometimes think we are. And anyway, until the next show, bye for now.